Hello and welcome to this session. In this session, we'll talk about a topic called serialization, the different serialized formats that we have in Hadoop. Now, before we talk that, it is important to understand how the data is stored in the database or in the file system for that matter. So let's take a simple example. So what you see here is the data. Now you can store the data in row format and columnar format. So how are these different? And which format is better and for what use case. So let's understand that. Before that, let's understand how the data is stored in the disk first. So this is the disk. Now here data is organized in the form of blocks. We know that data is placed in blocks. We have block 1, block 2, block 3 and block 4 in this example. So the data is basically placed in these blocks. Now if you want to query the data from this disk, you need to have that query fetch the data from these blocks. Now the data that you are looking might be in all of these blocks, or maybe in some part of the block, or maybe just in one block. So if I have a data which in block 1 and I just want to retrieve that particular data, then I can just my query can just go into block 1 and retrieve that data. Now, when it goes into the block 1 and just retrieves data only from the block 1, it means that it is not touching block 2, block 3 or block 4. So it is not scanning the entire disk. Rather, it is only fetching the data from a particular part of the disk, which is in this case block 1. This basically will improve the performance. And this is something that is important to understand. Now, look at another scenario where you have data across all the blocks. In this example, we have 4 blocks. So if you query the data and it has to go and fetch from block 1, block 2, block 3 and block 4, which basically is scanning the entire system or entire hard disk, which is going to cost a bit depending upon the size of the data. Your size is humongous, and retrieving that data from entire all the blocks would be a big effort. Now let's understand how the data is stored within the blocks. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are two ways we can store the data. We can store in row format. We can also store in columnar format. So first, let's understand how we can store in row format. So this is the data that we have. We have around 90,000 of IDs, 90,000 records you can say, and we have for each ID we have name, we have country, right? This is traditionally, if you store in a traditional database, let's say Oracle or something, so it is going to get stored something like this. So it is going to have all the data for a particular row. In this case, if you say 1 John India, so that's one record. It is going to store that first, and then it is going to store the next record, which is 2 Kevin Australia. Then it is going to store the third record, then it is going to store the fourth record. This way it will go and store all the 90,000 records. Now if you translate this into the blocks, how it is getting stored in the blocks. So if you look at this, the first record may go into the block 1, second record may also go into the block 1. In block 2 you have third record and fourth record, and then block n, how many number of blocks depending upon the size. So the block n will have the final block will have the final set of data. Now what is advantage of storing the data in this format? So let's say if I want to query something like, say I want to get the details of ID, let's say 1. So I want to get the ID, I want to get the name, I want to get the country, all the details. So in this example, we just took 3 columns, but just imagine you have like 100 columns, right? All those 100 columns data is stored in a one particular block. In this case, the data for ID 1 is in block 1. So you can just query the data. It will just retrieve the data from block 1. So it's not going to go and scan all the other data, all the other blocks. So this way your query performance will be good. So this is an advantage, right? But what is the disadvantage of this, right? So the same query, if I pull out a query where I wanted to just get all the IDs, right? I don't want to get the the name or the column which is this country. I don't want to get the country and name. I just want to get all the IDs, all the 90,000 IDs. So if you want to get all the 90,000 IDs, because each ID is present in different blocks, so you will have to go to block 1, block 2, you have to scan all the blocks to get all the data, all the ID. So that's the disadvantage of having the data stored in the row format. The so depending upon your use case, so if you want to get, if your queries are basically on where clause where you just wanted to get the entire record, then row format is great for you. But then if your queries are more of like, I want to get an aggregation, or I want to get a particular column of data, right, from the entire data, then this will not be a good practice. Right, so that's the advantage and disadvantage of having the data stored in the row format. Now, the other advantage is basically now inserts would be easy. So because as you can see here, right, the row is getting stored at the end of the block. So if I have a 91,000 row, then it gets stored at the end here, right after the 90,000 record. It is going to just append it to this block. So this way insights are not a problem. This is going to be an advantage. So if we have a lot of transactional data where you are querying the data for the entire record, then yes, this is a good practice. But if you are having more of an analytical approach where you're doing slicing and dicing, or you wanted to aggregate the data, this is not the right approach. So this is about row based storage, how you're storing the data in the row format. The second approach would be the column-based storage. Now, the same data, we have ID, we have name, we have country. If the same data, if I have to store it into the column-based storage, it would be something like this. So it will take all the data coming from a particular column. So it will take all the ID data. So if you can see here at the bottom, so 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to the last ID. So it will first store all of them first. Then it will take all the data from the second column. It will store like this. As you can see, John, Kevin, Michael, all this data is stored next. Then it will go and store all the data from the second other columns. So this way it will continue. So basically it will fetch all the data of a particular column, it will store, and then the next column, and then the next column. So if we put that in a block, so what is going to happen is all the data of ID is coming into one block, all the data of name is coming into another block, all the data of country is coming in another block. So what is the advantage of this, right? So if I want to get all the 90,000 IDs, I can just go and fetch that data from block 1. I don't have to scan block 2, or I don't have to scan any other blocks. So that way it would be easier for us to get the data. Right, so this is the advantage of storing the data in columnar format, right? So if you wanted to do aggregates, or if you wanted to selectively query the data and you want to get all of the data selectively, then this would be the right approach. You have the data in the blocks, and you just query the required columns from the block, or you just do an aggregation. So this would be a very good approach compared to the row-based format. Now, what are the disadvantages? Right, the same advantage that we had for the row-based format, that would come as a disadvantage. So if I want to get the data of a particular record, let's say of ID1, I want to get the ID, I want to get its name, I want to get its country, then my ID is stored in block 1, my name is stored in block 2, the country data is stored in block 3. So it has to scan all the blocks to get that particular data. So if you're doing a transactional based queries, this is not the right approach. It is more of an analytical query or aggregated query, right? Also, inserts would become a little tougher, because if I have a new record coming in, so I have to make place in the block 1 to store ID. I have to make place in the block 2 to store name. I have to make some space in the block N, or the last block, to store the country. So they are basically storing in the middle rather than at the end, as was the case with the row-based format. So this is the advantage and disadvantages of the columnar-based format. So just to summarize this, what is row storage and column storage? So the advantages or disadvantages, whatever it is. So row storage keeps the data on the same block, so one record on the same block. Columns basically keeps the entire column data on the same block. Now, because we have the same record on the same block, it is easy to read and manipulate one record at a time, which if that is in the case of a row storage. But so this is basically more of a transactional base. Now on the column store, it is easy to analyze the entire column data because the entire column data is stored in one particular block, so you can quickly get that data. Row storage, it's easy to insert the data because it is inserted right at the end. Column storage are easy to compress the data, so the compression techniques on column storage are much stronger. Row storage is slow to analyze a large amount of data. That is basically, it's not meant for that. It is on transactional base. Column storage is basically meant for the analytical purpose, so it is slow to analyze the new data or manipulate the old data. So this is the difference, and this is the features of row storage versus column storage. I hope this is clear to you. So we are going to understand a few of the file formats in our next sessions, and this particular session, whatever we learned in this session, will be very helpful in understanding the next topic. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys there.